Just keep paddling. Just keep paddling. Just keep paddling.
Hello and welcome back to 340 Paddler, and today I want to follow up on our most recent 340 live webinar, which you have seen on this channel, and if you haven't, it's probably the video above this. Anyway, that was on training and racing, and what I want to do is follow up on some of the practices that were mentioned because we flew through them. And I want to break them down a little bit more and make it easier to understand, because obviously when you're looking at all these beautiful people, you are frequently distracted from the point of the webinar. I know Joe distracts me on a regular basis. That being said, let's move on. Let's look at Joe's training. Now, Joe Mann, of course, is known for being incredibly fast on the river. He flies down the river like no one else. And his finish time, well, of course, time waits for no man, except possibly for Joe Mann. Now, he puts in roughly 6 to 10 hours per week. This may be surprisingly short, especially if you have a background or you're familiar with people who do Ironman training, marathon training, etc. But it's how he uses the time, how he breaks it down. And it should be said that, as he pointed out in the webinar, he is very flexible. These are ideals, but of course it doesn't always happen. So we just kind of work with what we have. You never know. There might be a lot of work stuff one week. You might only get in a 5K one week, and then the next week you can do all of your workouts. So that being said, I want to break down what he said. Now, first of all, here is what he mentioned in the webinar. We have October through February, basically winter time and recovery. He's running and lifting. We'll get into that. And then March through July, that's where he gets into paddling. So let's break this down a little bit for those of you who are looking at this going, wow, this seems insane. So in terms of running and cardio, while I don't have a solid number, I'm willing to bet that he's probably doing about 3 to 4 times a week going out for a run. He's probably doing somewhere in the ballpark of 45 minutes to an hour, maybe a little bit more per run. He might be breaking it up with biking or any other form of cardio. Really, any form of cardio works here. What he's doing is he's building an aerobic base and spending a lot of time doing that. So it's going to be very important. He also mentioned lifting, in this case specifically circuit training, which means full body workouts 3 times per week. Now, he's doing this to build up the muscle that he lost during the race season, because of course the races that we're doing are so long that they're actually catabolic. They're breaking down the muscle itself. So we need to build that back up, and the off season is a great time to do it. Now he's doing circuit training full body so that he can work on everything. And of course, this is the time where you would do some rehab work. You might work on a sore shoulder. You might work on something else. It really comes down to a personal preference and where you need to work. And keep in mind, Joe's been doing this for a very long time, so he's not coming in as a new rookie every year. He's already starting at a very high level. And he said that these circuits take around an hour and a half, 2 hours. He's doing some cardio in there, so he might get on the rower, he might get on the erg. He's doing a number of exercises. You can always go online and find out what exercises work really well for paddling, and that might be different whether you're in a canoe, on a stand-up paddleboard, or in a kayak. Now, March through July, it was kind of a throwaway, but he mentions that he cuts his strength work and increases his running. This is really common. First of all, it's horrible to run in the winter. It's cold, it's snowy, there are bears. Sorry, that might just be Wisconsin, but sometimes they come up from Chicago. It's a mess. Moving on. He's increasing his running. Why is he doing that? Because that way, he's using his cross training to develop that aerobic base. As Chuck McHenry said probably 12 years ago or so on the forums, it takes a long time, as long as 6 months, to start to develop a good aerobic base. So you want that cardio in there. And it's cross training, which means he's less likely to be injured and he can let his body recover between paddle workouts. In terms of those paddle workouts, we're looking at about once a month for a long race, once a week for a tempo workout, once a week for a sprint workout, and once a week for a long day. What do those mean? Well, it means this. Tempo is basically more than likely a lactic threshold workout. Basically, you're trying to hold the same fast pace for as long as you can, preferably 25 to 50 minutes. And you're trying to hold a good, consistent pace throughout. So you don't want to fall off at the end. That would indicate that you're going a little bit too hard. But you can increase your lactic threshold, increase that speed and the time that you hold it for, thus increasing your endurance. He also mentioned sprint intervals. Now, we've talked about these on the channel before. Basically, in his case, 3 to 5 intervals of 1 to 5 minutes. And this is working beyond your aerobic threshold. This is allowing your body to get used to working at a much higher pace, and it helps with technique and some other issues. So very valuable. But don't jump into really fast sprint intervals if you don't have some kind of base. So if you're a rookie, I would suggest starting with long, slow distance so that the ligaments, the connective tissues, the muscles can develop to the point that they can support you during the sprint interval. And then once a week, doing a long day. Just be like Wellner. Go out there for 2 hours or more, doing your long day. You want to hold a good, consistent pace as best you can. Of course, if you're on a river, that's tricky because the current changes, but you'll get a hang of it. This also gets you used to being in the boat, in the seat. This is very important if you're in a new boat, you're a rookie, or you're trying something specific new. Now, he also mentioned racing. You can find these races, the races that were mentioned in the webinar, at midwestpaddleracing.com. And the specific ones that he mentioned are the Mean Lamine on April 24th, Missouri River Shootout, roughly May 15th or so, and Missouri River Freedom Race, which is at the end of June. And he builds these specifically to build up your distance and your endurance, get you used to what you're going to see in the 340. Now let's talk about Salli O'Donnell and her training. Of course, she is a beast out there. She can beat, I would say she can beat anyone in the field. She would probably, she might beat Joe Mann. Who knows? But her training is very different. So she's doing about 15 hours per week. She's doing more than Joe is, but everyone trains differently. In terms of finish time, well, last year she nearly beat the entire field with the exception of the Kraken and one other team boat. So I'm going with exceptional. She does a lot of active lifestyle activities, including general housework, but also stretching, yoga, rehab. We'll get into that. And then her paddling looks very, very similar to Joe's. And what I'm going to do here is break down the parts that we haven't already covered. So in terms of active lifestyle, what she's doing is making sure that she's taking the stairs, that she's outside raking leaves, probably not shoveling snow, seeing as how she's in Florida, not Wisconsin, but it changes for everyone. This could be going out and playing with your kids. This could be any number of different things, even going for walks on a regular basis, just staying physically active, because the same minutes that you put into a slow run could just as well be done doing yard work or working on the house. You're still putting stress on your body, and that's a positive. So it doesn't have to be a set workout. She does a lot of stretching and yoga. Now, yoga takes on different forms. Stretching takes on different forms. It depends where you're tight, where you need work, and this is a very individual sort of thing. I also threw rehab in there because frequently at the end of the season or during training, you will find, hey, I'm sore here or I've got a pain here. And that's the time to go ahead and start addressing it. You don't want to address it 3 weeks before the race. That's way too close. In terms of paddle, everything is roughly the same as Joe. Obviously, she does about 1 hour a day to build calluses, but that isn't fast. She's also not running. So that is an interesting piece. It adds a lot of time to what she's doing. But what I want to focus on is the technique work. Now, the technique work is interesting. The reason it is there is to become more efficient. Obviously, if you're in your 20s or 30s, you can just focus on power. But as you get older, you need to focus on good technique. And technique can take you further than power and strength training for a lot of athletes. So it's something to consider, really focusing on and working on technique. In her case, she's doing a set technique workout every week for 1 to 2 hours. In this case, working with, I believe it was her husband, who is looking at her technique, possibly recording it so that she can continuously improve. Eric Pikey, very different training. Now, he has a 62-hour finish and a love of the Stanley Cup, apparently. Although I stole this from his Facebook, so I don't know. He might have just been standing there or confused. It looks a lot like the cup that you win if you were to be the overall winner for the 340. But no one actually knows because no one sees it. It just hangs out in Joe Mann's basement. He stares at it. Whatever, it works. Anyway, he was working towards overall fitness with a trainer. He didn't do a lot of serious training before May, which is impressive for the 62-hour finish. And he focused on paddling technique and cutting weight. As a new paddler, that's a great way of doing it, focusing on paddle technique, not necessarily cutting weight. It depends on the individual. And his workouts were very interesting. They were all over the place. So he would do 2 workouts of roughly 45 minutes to an hour per week, plus 1 on weekends, which is why he's at 3 to 5 hours, give or take, per week. Now, it's interesting. He was focused on overall fitness, and for a new paddler, this is a fantastic way to go. Let me remind you that we've had a number of paddlers in the past who came to us from other sports and did remarkably well, or focused on overall fitness rather than paddle-specific fitness, and have done remarkably well. I'm thinking of Dr. Jerry Mitchell. I'm thinking of Scott Robeson. I'm thinking of Bob Harms. People who came from other disciplines. And this variety was really helpful because if you're starting out and you're new, pretty much everything needs to improve. So it's a great way to go about it. In his case, doing sprint hills was one example they gave for 30 minutes, or doing circuit training and strength training, or doing Tabata or interval workouts, really the same sort of thing. So a great way to do it. And it doesn't have to be in the boat necessarily. It can be other things. This can take the form of cross training. So another way to think of things. But we've seen some really intense workouts here. What about some others? So I just want to bring up a couple. I want to bring up Mark Holloway, which I believe about 2017 finished in 40 hours. He was second. Really amazing time. And by my estimate, he's doing 8 to 10 hours, give or take, per week. And he's following more of an Ironman schedule. So he's swimming twice a week, about 1.5 miles. So that'd be probably a little over an hour. Maybe he's a faster swimmer, but somewhere in that hour range, give or take. He's doing a bike ride of about 24 miles per week. That's probably about an hour, maybe a hair more. He's doing 2 runs of 5 to 7 miles per week. Again, around about an hour. And 2 paddles of 10 to 12 miles per week. Those are probably pushing an hour and a half, 2 hours, give or take, depending on his speed. This is cardiocentric. But the thing is, each of us has slightly different physiology. Some people have an easy time building muscle and will get more response from intervals, whereas others need to work on endurance or get the best results by working on endurance. And it's kind of 6 of one, 12 of the 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, if I can get my metaphor right. What is happening here is he's putting in the miles so he has the stamina to just keep going. And so when he gets to Herman, he's feeling about as good as he did back at Glasgow, which is another way to go. You can also look at my training, which my finish times have been everywhere from the back of the field to 42 hours. And in my case, throughout the winter season, really recovery through March, I do run or swim. Right now I'm doing run primarily, but swim over the past couple of years has been helpful. COVID has kind of put a kibosh on that. About an hour, give or take, 3 times a week. I change that in and out for running. It's fine. Either one will work. I do strength about twice a week, circuit training, and I paddle on an ergometer about twice a week. By the way, Joe Mann has an ergometer, but he's probably using it more as cross training and that sort of thing than he is for sprint work, because sprint work on an ergometer can be, well, let's use the word fun with air quotes around it. From March through July, basically when I can get on the water safely, when there's not ice on the water, I do the tempo workouts, the intervals, the long days, really mimicking a lot of what we see from Joe Mann and Salli O'Donnell. And then my long day is a 2+ hour paddle plus a run. And then I'm running in there as well. I continue with strength because I do not hold muscle really easily. So I need to keep that strength training going as much as possible. But I'm also working on stamina and endurance. So everyone works differently. If you want to have fun, you can join the MR340 group on Garmin Connect, where you can see how a lot of people, Brad Daniels, Wayne Anderson, Ashbourne Larson, some very fast paddlers are training. You can see what they're doing day to day. It's not really a competition, but it's fun to see what other people do. Just keep in mind, you don't want to mimic 100% what any one person does. Everyone's physiology is different. Everyone's body will respond differently to different training stimuli. And ultimately, I'm just trying to get you to the end of the race, and preferably get you there in one piece fairly comfortably. The best way to do that is to look at some of these ideas. Do not just mimic Joe Mann or Salli O'Donnell or Mark Holloway. Come up with your own plan. And then over the years, you can play with it and tinker with it. But at the end of the day, make it your own. I just want to make sure that everyone kind of understood where everyone was coming from on the webinar and understood some of the terms and ideas that we're just throwing around as if everyone understands them. So until next time, this is 340 Paddler, hoping that you keep your paddle in the water.